I thought turning 68 would be ordinary. Another year, another birthday dinner with family who barely remembered my name. But when that young waitress leaned over my shoulder and pressed a crumpled note into my trembling hand, when I read those 4 words that made my blood run cold, I realized this wasn't just another birthday. This was the night I would discover that someone at my own table, someone I had loved and trusted my entire life, wanted me dead. And the worst part? When I switched my poisoned wine glass to save myself, when chaos erupted and my daughter-in-law collapsed in front of everyone, they all turned to look at me with the same expression. Not concern, not confusion, but accusation. In that moment, surrounded by my own family, I became the monster in their story, and I had no idea that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would unravel every truth I'd ever believed about the people I loved. What I discovered in the days that followed would destroy everything. A secret inheritance worth hundreds of millions, a half-sister I never knew existed, and a betrayal so deep, so unforgivable, that even now, with all the money in the world, I would give it all back just to unknow what I learned. Some truths don't set you free. They trap you in a prison of broken trust and shattered love. And this is my story of how one birthday dinner became the death of everything I thought I knew. If you want to know how this story ends, if you want to discover who really tried to kill me and why, make sure to follow this channel. Hit that like button and comment below where you're watching from, because this story will change the way you look at your own family forever. It was my birthday. 68 years of life reduced to a long table at Romano's Italian Bistro in downtown Portland, surrounded by laughter that didn't belong to me. The kind of laughter that fills a room but leaves your heart empty. My son had insisted on throwing this party, said it would be good for the family to come together. But as I sat there watching everyone toast to my special day, I realized nobody was actually celebrating me. They were celebrating the excuse to be seen, to post photos, to pretend we were the kind of family that gathered out of love rather than obligation. The restaurant was one of those upscale places with dim Edison bulbs hanging from exposed brick walls, the kind where they serve tiny portions on oversized plates and charge you $40 for pasta. My daughter-in-law Rebecca had chosen it. She always chose everything. Where we ate, when we gathered, even what gifts I should be grateful to receive. She sat across from me now, her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around a wine glass, laughing at something my nephew said. Her diamond bracelet caught the light every time she moved her wrist, a constant reminder of the wealth she'd brought into my son's life, and the poverty she seemed to think I represented. I had spent the morning getting ready, my arthritic fingers struggling with the clasp of the pearl necklace my late husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. I'd chosen my best dress, the navy blue one with the modest collar, and even put on lipstick, something I rarely did anymore. I wanted to look dignified. I wanted to prove I still mattered. But as I sat there, watching Rebecca whisper something to my son Daniel that made him glance at me with what looked like pity, I felt smaller than I had in years. The waiter had just placed a beautiful glass of Merlot in front of me, the deep burgundy liquid catching the candlelight like liquid rubies. I don't usually drink much, maybe a glass at Christmas, but tonight I thought, why not? It's my birthday. Maybe the wine would smooth the sharp edges of this evening, would make the fake smiles easier to return, would help me pretend I didn't notice how Rebecca had seated me at the very end of the table, like an afterthought. That's when she appeared. The waitress was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much for someone her age. She wore the standard black apron with the restaurant's logo, but there was something different about her. Her hands were shaking as she leaned over my shoulder, pretending to adjust the silverware that didn't need adjusting. And then I felt it, the sharp press of paper against my palm as she pressed a folded note into my hand. Our eyes met for just a fraction of a second. Hers were filled with tears that hadn't yet fallen, with a terror so raw it made my blood run cold. She didn't say a word out loud, but her lips moved silently, urgently. Please. My fingers closed around the note instinctively. hiding it in my lap as she moved away quickly, almost stumbling over her own feet. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the conversation happening around me. With trembling hands, I unfolded the small piece of paper under the table. The handwriting was rushed, almost illegible, but the words were clear enough. Don't drink it. The wine, please. Time stopped. I stared at the glass in front of me. The wine I'd been about to sip just seconds ago. It looked perfectly normal, beautiful even, but suddenly it seemed to pulse with danger, like I was looking at poison dressed up in crystal and candlelight. My throat tightened. My hands went ice cold despite the warmth of the restaurant. Who would want to poison me? And why? Before my mind could catch up with my body, before I could think through what I was doing, some primal instinct took over. Survival. Pure animal survival. Rebecca had just turned to talk to the person on her other side, her wine glass sitting unattended within arm's reach. In one smooth motion, while everyone was distracted by a story my brother-in-law was telling about his golf game, I switched our glasses. My hands were shaking so badly I almost knocked both glasses over, but somehow I managed it. The stem of her glass was still warm from her touch. I pulled my hands back into my lap. The note crumpled in my sweating palm and watched. Just watched. 5 minutes passed. 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. I couldn't breathe properly. Couldn't think. Every sound in the restaurant seemed amplified. The clinking of silverware, the burst of laughter from nearby tables, the soft jazz playing over the speakers. My family kept talking, kept laughing, completely unaware that I was sitting there in my own private nightmare. And then it happened. Rebecca reached for her wine glass, my wine glass, and took a long sip. She smiled at something my son said, took another sip, and then her expression changed. It started with confusion. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together as she looked down at the glass. Then her hand went to her throat. The confusion turned to alarm. She tried to speak, but only a choking sound came out. The wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, red wine spreading across the wood like blood. "Rebecca?" Daniel's voice cut through the noise. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" Her face was turning red now, her hands clawing at her throat. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She crashed back into her chair, then slumped forward onto the table, sending plates and glasses flying. The sound of breaking china filled the air. People started screaming. "Call 911, someone shouted. "She's choking. She can't breathe." The restaurant erupted into chaos. Chairs scraped back, people rushed forward, everyone trying to help. Daniel was holding Rebecca, shaking her, screaming her name. But through it all, through the panic and the noise and the terror, I sat frozen in my chair, watching the scene unfold like I was watching it happen to someone else. And then, like a physical blow, the realization hit me. That was meant for me. The poison in that glass was meant for me. If I had taken even one sip, I would be the one lying there, dying in front of my entire family. But the horror didn't end there. As the paramedics rushed in, as Rebecca was lifted onto a stretcher still gasping for air, as my son sobbed and followed them towards the ambulance, someone spoke. It was my niece Margaret, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking. "Wait, that was Eleanor's glass." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Heads turned, eyes found me. And in those eyes, I saw something that made the poison look merciful. Accusation. She switched the glasses. Margaret continued, her hand over her mouth. I saw her. Right before Rebecca drank, she switched them. "What?" Daniel's voice came from the doorway where he'd stopped, halfway to following his wife. He turned to look at me, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. "Mom? Mom, what is she talking about?" I tried to speak, tried to explain, but my voice wouldn't work. All I could do was sit there, an old woman in her best dress, with a crumpled note hidden in her lap, and the weight of a dozen accusing stares pressing down on her. "She tried to poison Rebecca," my nephew said, his voice filled with disbelief. "Oh my God, she actually tried to kill her." "No," I finally managed to whisper. "No, I didn't. I wasn't." But nobody was listening. They were looking at me like I was a monster. My own family, the people I had loved and sacrificed for and raised and supported, were looking at me like I was capable of murder. Daniel took a step toward me, just one step, but the look on his face, this devastation and betrayal and rage, made me wish the poison had been for me after all, made me wish I had drunk it before any of this could happen. "What did you do?" he whispered. "Mom, what did you do?" The restaurant manager was on the phone with the police. Other diners were recording on their phones, capturing my humiliation for the world to see. Someone was crying. Someone else was demanding I be restrained. And all I could think was, this is my birthday. This is how my 68th birthday ends. Not with cake and candles and love, but with poison and betrayal and the death of everything I thought I knew about my own life. As they escorted me out of the restaurant, past the staring diners and the flashing phone cameras, past the remnants of the birthday dinner that had become a crime scene, I caught one last glimpse of the waitress who had saved my life. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her face, watching me with an expression of absolute agony, and I realized with a sinking certainty that this was only the beginning. Someone had tried to kill me tonight, had planned it carefully, had poisoned my wine at my own birthday dinner, surrounded by my own family. But who? And even more terrifying, why was I now the one being accused? The police station smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. They'd brought me in through the back entrance, like I was some kind of criminal they needed to hide from the public. My hands were still shaking as I sat in that cold metal chair, the fluorescent lights above me buzzing like angry wasps. I'd never been inside a police station before, never even had a speeding ticket. And now, at 68 years old, I was sitting in an interrogation room being treated like a murderer. Detective Morrison was his name. He was maybe 50, with gray hair at his temples and eyes that had seen too many liars to trust anyone anymore. He sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and a pen, watching me like I was some kind of puzzle he needed to solve. Behind him, through the one-way mirror, I knew other officers were watching, judging, deciding whether this old woman in her navy blue dress and pearl necklace was capable of attempted murder. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice deliberately calm, the kind of calm that made my skin crawl. "Can you explain to me why you switched wine glasses with your daughter-in-law?" I opened my mouth to answer, but what came out was a sob I didn't know I'd been holding back. The tears I'd been fighting since the restaurant finally broke free, streaming down my face and ruining the makeup I'd so carefully applied that morning. I must have looked pathetic. I felt pathetic. I wasn't trying to hurt her, I managed to say between gasps. Someone gave me a note, a waitress. She warned me not to drink the wine. Detective Morrison wrote something down, his expression unchanging. A note. "Do you still have this note?" My hand went to my purse, which they'd let me keep. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper and placed it on the table between us. He picked it up with a pen, careful not to touch it with his bare hands, and examined it. "Don't drink it. The wine. Please," he read aloud. "And you're saying a waitress gave you this?" "Yes," she pressed it into my hand. She looked terrified, Detective. Her hands were shaking, she had tears in her eyes. She was trying to save my life. And instead of calling for help, instead of alerting anyone, you decided to switch your potentially poisoned wine with your daughter-in-law's glass. His tone wasn't accusatory exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the tone of someone who'd already made up his mind and was just going through the motions. "I didn't think." The words burst out of me louder than I'd intended. I panicked. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I knew was that someone was trying to poison me, and my survival instinct kicked in. I just wanted to not die. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Your family seems to think you had motive. They say there's been tension between you and Rebecca for years. They say she controls your son's finances, that she's kept you at arm's length from your grandchildren." Heat flooded my face. So they'd been talking about me, discussing my relationship with Rebecca, dissecting every awkward family dinner, every slight, every moment of tension, making me sound like a bitter old woman with a grudge. I won't lie and say Rebecca and I were close, I said, forcing myself to meet his eyes. But I would never, ever hurt her. She's my son's wife. She's the mother of my grandchildren. Whatever problems we had, they were small things, petty things, not worth killing over. Then who would want to poison you, Mrs. Chen? Who has reason to want you dead? The question hung in the air like smoke. Who would want me dead? I was nobody, just an old widow living on Social Security and my late husband's pension. I lived in a small house in southeast Portland, the same house where Daniel had grown up with its creaky floors and outdated kitchen. I volunteered at the library on Tuesdays. I went to church on Sundays. I kept to myself. I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful. I wasn't a threat to anyone. I don't know, I whispered. I honestly don't know. But even as I said it, something nagged at the back of my mind. Something I couldn't quite grasp, like trying to remember a dream after waking up. There was something I was forgetting, something important. They kept me there for hours, asked the same questions over and over, trying to catch me in a lie. Where had I been that day? Who had access to my wine glass? Had I noticed anything unusual? Did I have any enemies? The questions blurred together until I couldn't think straight anymore. Couldn't remember what I'd already said and what I hadn't. It was almost midnight when they finally let me go. Rebecca was stable, they told me. The doctors had pumped her stomach, and whatever poison had been in that wine hadn't had time to do permanent damage. She would survive. That should have been good news, should have filled me with relief. But all I felt was a hollow numbness, because I knew what came next. They didn't have enough evidence to arrest me yet, but I could see in Detective Morrison's eyes that he believed I was guilty. And if he believed it, others would too. My son didn't come to pick me up. I had to call a taxi, something I'd never done before, and give the driver my address in a voice I barely recognized as my own. As we drove through the dark Portland streets, past the hipster bars and the late-night food carts and the homeless camps under the bridges, I saw my reflection in the window. I looked ancient, haunted, like someone who'd aged 20 years in one night. The house was dark when I arrived. I'd left in such a hurry that afternoon, so excited about my birthday dinner, that I'd forgotten to leave any lights on. Now it loomed before me like a tomb, cold and unwelcoming. I paid the driver with shaking hands and watched his taillights disappear down the street, leaving me alone in the darkness. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The birthday cards I'd received in the mail that morning were still on the kitchen counter. The cake I'd baked for myself, just in case there wasn't one at the restaurant, sat covered on the counter. The presents I'd wrapped for myself, because nobody else ever remembered what I actually wanted, were stacked neatly on the dining room table. I sank into my husband's old recliner, the one I'd kept even though the fabric was worn and it didn't match anything else in the room, and finally let myself fall apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I'd kept locked away for years. They shook my entire body, made my chest ache, left me gasping for air. This was supposed to be my birthday, a celebration. Instead, it had become a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My phone buzzed, a text message. My heart leapt, thinking maybe it was Daniel, maybe he'd come to his senses, maybe he wanted to hear my side of the story. But when I looked at the screen, I didn't recognize the number. They're all going to believe you did it, but I know the truth. I know who really wanted you dead. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m., Laurelhurst Park, by the duck pond. Come alone, or you'll never know the truth. The waitress who saved your life. My blood ran cold. How did she have my number? And more importantly, what truth was she talking about? Who wanted me dead? I stared at that message until my eyes burned, reading it over and over, trying to understand what was happening to my life. 24 hours ago, I'd been a simple old woman planning her birthday dinner. Now I was a suspected murderer, with a mysterious stranger claiming to have answers I desperately needed. The house creaked around me, every sound suddenly sinister. Was someone watching me? Had they followed me home from the police station? I got up and checked every lock on every door and window, my heart pounding with each step. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I caught sight of a photo on the wall. It was from Daniel's wedding 15 years ago. Rebecca in her white dress, Daniel in his tuxedo, and me standing off to the side, already pushed to the margins even then. I'd been so happy that day, so proud of my son. I'd welcomed Rebecca with open arms, even when she'd criticized the gift I'd brought. Even when she'd rearranged the seating so I wasn't at the head table. Looking at that photo now, I wondered, had I been blind all these years? Had I missed something crucial while I was too busy trying to be the perfect mother, the accommodating mother-in-law, the grandmother who never complained? Tomorrow I would go to that park. Tomorrow I would meet the waitress and learn the truth, whatever it was. But tonight, alone in my dark house, with my ruined birthday and my destroyed reputation, I allowed myself to ask the question I'd been avoiding all evening. If someone really did want me dead, what did I have that was worth killing for? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rebecca's face turning red, heard the sound of the wine glass shattering on the floor, felt the weight of all those accusing stares. By the time pale morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, I'd been awake for over 30 hours, my body exhausted but my mind racing like a hamster on a wheel that never stopped turning. The doorbell rang at 7:30 in the morning, startling me so badly I nearly dropped my coffee mug. My hands were already shaking from lack of sleep and too much anxiety, and now hot coffee splashed onto my bathrobe, staining the faded pink fabric. I set the mug down on the kitchen counter and made my way to the front door, my slippers shuffling against the hardwood floor that Tom had refinished himself 20 years ago, back when he was still alive, back when I wasn't alone. Through the peephole, I could see my neighbor, Patricia Kowalski. She'd lived next door for 32 years, had been there when we'd moved into this house with a baby Daniel in my arms. We'd shared coffee countless mornings, had watched each other's children grow up, had supported each other through divorces and deaths and all the small tragedies of ordinary life. But when I opened the door, the look on her face told me everything had changed. "Patricia," I said, trying to smile, trying to pretend last night hadn't happened. "Would you like to come in for—" "Is it true?" she interrupted, her voice sharp in a way I'd never heard before. She was still in her nightgown and slippers, her gray hair uncombed, like she'd rushed over the moment she'd heard. "Eleanor, please tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't try to poison that poor girl." The words hit me like a physical slap. "How did you— Who told you?" "It's all over Facebook. Margaret posted about it last night. There are videos, Eleanor. Videos of you being escorted out of the restaurant by police. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone." My legs suddenly felt weak. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "Margaret posted on Facebook about what happened." Patricia pulled out her phone, and with a few swipes, she held it up for me to see. There it was, Margaret's post, shared over 200 times already. The heading read, "Family birthday turns into nightmare. Elderly woman attempts to murder daughter-in-law." Below it were 3 shaky video clips, obviously taken by other restaurant patrons, showing Rebecca collapsing, showing the chaos, showing me being led away. And in the comments, hundreds of comments, people I'd never met were calling me a monster, a witch, saying I should be locked up, saying old people shouldn't be allowed in public if they were going to act like this. "I didn't do it," I whispered, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Patricia, you have to believe me. Someone tried to poison me. I switched the glasses to save my own life." She looked at me for a long moment. I saw something in her eyes that broke my heart all over again. Doubt. After 32 years of friendship, of shared secrets and mutual support, she doubted me. "I want to believe you, Eleanor. I really do. But why would anyone want to poison you? You're just—" She trailed off, but I knew what she was going to say. "You're just a harmless old woman. You're nobody important." "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking. "But I'm going to find out." Patricia left without another word, and I watched through the window as she hurried back to her own house, pulling her nightgown tight around her, as if proximity to me might contaminate her somehow. Within an hour, 3 more neighbors had found excuses to walk past my house, slowing down to stare, some even taking pictures. I closed all the curtains and sat in the semi-darkness of my living room, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. The phone started ringing at 8 o'clock and didn't stop. First it was my sister-in-law, Tom's brother's wife, calling to tell me she always knew there was something off about me, that Tom had made a mistake marrying someone like me. Then it was my cousin from Seattle, saying she didn't want me at the family reunion next month. Then it was someone from my church, very politely suggesting I might want to find another congregation to attend, at least until this whole mess was cleared up. Each call was another knife in my back. Each conversation was another relationship destroyed. By noon, I'd stopped answering altogether. Just let the phone ring and ring while I sat there in the dark, wondering how my entire life had unraveled in less than 24 hours. That's when I heard it. A sound from upstairs. A creak, like someone was walking across the floor of my bedroom. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I lived alone. There shouldn't be anyone upstairs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then another creak, this time closer to the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I looked around for something to defend myself with and grabbed the first thing I saw, a heavy crystal vase that had been my mother's, one of the few valuable things I owned. Holding it in both hands like a weapon, I crept toward the stairs. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm armed and I'm calling the police right now." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then I heard the window in my bedroom slide open, heard the crunch of someone climbing out onto the roof of my porch, heard them jump down into the yard. By the time I made it to the bedroom window and looked out, all I saw was a figure in dark clothing disappearing around the corner of my fence. Someone had been in my house. Someone had been going through my things while I was downstairs. With trembling hands, I looked around my bedroom. Everything looked normal at first, but then I noticed it. My dresser drawers were slightly open, just an inch or two. The closet door was ajar when I always kept it closed. Someone had been searching for something. I went to my dresser and opened the top drawer, where I kept important documents in an old shoebox. Birth certificates, my marriage license, Tom's death certificate, the deed to the house. But the shoebox was gone. Just gone. In its place was a small piece of paper, identical to the note the waitress had given me. Same size, same type of paper, but this one had different words. "They know about the inheritance. You're in more danger than you realize. Trust no one." My legs gave out and I sank to the floor, my back against the dresser. Inheritance? What inheritance? Tom and I had lived modestly our entire lives. We'd had enough to pay our bills and take one vacation a year, usually just camping in the Columbia River Gorge. When he died, there'd been a small life insurance policy that I'd used to pay off the mortgage and a pension that barely covered my monthly expenses. There was no inheritance. But even as I thought that, a memory stirred. Something my father had said to me years ago on his deathbed at Providence Hospital. I'd been holding his hand, watching him struggle for each breath, and he'd gripped my fingers with surprising strength. "Eleanor," he'd whispered, his voice raspy with pain and medication. "The safety deposit box. Key is in my Bible. Everything I couldn't tell you. Everything they don't know about, it's all yours. But don't tell anyone. Promise me you won't tell anyone." I'd promised, of course I'd promised. But within days of his death, I'd been so overwhelmed with grief and funeral arrangements and probate court that I'd forgotten all about it. The Bible was somewhere in my attic, probably buried under 20 years of Christmas decorations and old photo albums. I'd never even looked for the key, but someone else had remembered. Someone else knew about my father's secret, and they were willing to kill to get whatever was in that safety deposit box. I pulled myself up off the floor and went back downstairs, my mind racing. I had to get to that Bible, had to find that key before whoever was doing this found it first. But even as I headed towards the attic stairs, I heard car doors slamming outside. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw 2 police cars parking in front of my house. Detective Morrison got out of one, along with another officer I didn't recognize. They were coming up my front walk, their expressions serious and determined. This wasn't a friendly visit. This wasn't them coming to tell me they'd found the real culprit. The doorbell rang, loud and official sounding. "Mrs. Chen, this is Detective Morrison. We need to ask you some more questions. Please open the door." I looked at the clock on the wall. 1:30 in the afternoon. In 30 minutes, I was supposed to meet the waitress at Laurelhurst Park. She was supposed to tell me the truth about who wanted me dead. But if the police took me in for questioning again, if they kept me there like they had last night, I'd miss the meeting. I'd miss my only chance to find out what was really going on. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. "Mrs. Chen, we can see your car in the driveway. We know you're home. Please open the door or we'll be forced to enter." I stood there in my living room, trapped between the police at my front door and a mysterious meeting that might hold all the answers. My father's Bible was still in the attic. The safety deposit box key was still hidden somewhere in this house. And someone, somewhere, was watching my every move, waiting for me to lead them to whatever secret my father had died protecting. The doorbell rang a third time. I made my decision. I opened the door. What choice did I have? Running would only make me look guilty, and I was already drowning in suspicion. Detective Morrison stood on my porch with that same unreadable expression, his partner beside him, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a notebook already in her hand. "Mrs. Chen," Morrison said, his tone professionally courteous, but with an edge that made my stomach clench. "We need you to come down to the station again. Rebecca Holloway has regained consciousness, and she's made some statements we need to clarify with you." My mouth went dry. "What kind of statements?" "It would be better if we discuss this at the station. You're not under arrest, but we strongly advise you to cooperate fully." The way he said it made it clear that not under arrest was a temporary condition, one that could change at any moment. I glanced at the clock again. 1:35. The meeting with the waitress was in 25 minutes. 25 minutes to get answers that might save my life, might clear my name, might explain why my entire world was collapsing around me. "Can I at least change out of my bathrobe?" I asked, gesturing to my stained, wrinkled clothing. I hadn't showered, hadn't even brushed my hair. I looked like exactly what I was, a desperate old woman at the end of a rope. Morrison nodded. 5 minutes. Officer Bradley will wait here with you." The female officer followed me upstairs, standing in my doorway while I changed into a simple gray sweater and black slacks. My hands shook as I tried to button the sweater, and I had to start over twice. Through the window, I could see more neighbors gathering on the sidewalk, watching the police cars, whispering to each other. My humiliation was becoming a neighborhood spectacle. As I pulled on my shoes, my eyes drifted to the attic door at the end of the hallway. My father's Bible was up there somewhere, with the key to whatever secret had gotten me into this nightmare. But there was no time now. No time to search, no time to find answers, no time to do anything but follow these officers and pray that whatever Rebecca had said wouldn't be enough to put me in prison. The drive to the police station felt like a funeral procession. Officer Bradley drove while Morrison sat in the passenger seat, both of them silent. I sat in the back, staring out the window at the familiar streets of Portland, wondering if this was the last time I'd see them as a free woman. We passed the coffee shop where Tom and I used to get breakfast on Sunday mornings. We passed the elementary school where Daniel had learned to read. We passed the hospital where my husband had died in my arms 7 years ago, whispering that he loved me with his last breath. Everything in my life had been so ordinary, so simple, and now it was all burning down, and I didn't even know why. At the station, they put me in a different interrogation room this time. This one had a water stain on the ceiling and smelled like industrial cleaner. Morrison sat across from me with a manila folder, and the way he opened it, slowly and deliberately, told me I wasn't going to like what was inside. "Mrs. Chen," he began, "Rebecca Holloway woke up this morning. The doctors say she's lucky to be alive. Another few minutes and the damage would have been irreversible." I swallowed hard. I'm glad she's okay. I never wanted her to get hurt. I was trying to save my own life. "She says you've been threatening her for months." Morrison pulled out a printed screenshot of text messages. "These are from your phone number to hers. June 15th, you're going to regret the day you married my son. July 22nd, you've taken everything from me. One day you'll pay for what you've done. August 9th. I know what you're planning and I won't let you get away with it. My blood turned to ice. I never sent those messages. I don't even text. Daniel had to show me how to use my phone, and I can barely send him pictures of the garden. I would never. Your number, Mrs. Chen. These came from your phone. Then someone else used my phone. Someone else sent them. My voice was rising, panic making it shrill. Detective, please, I'm being framed. Can't you see that? Someone is trying to make me look guilty. Morrison leaned back, studying me. There's more. Your daughter-in-law also claims that you've been acting strangely for weeks, asking questions about their finances, about insurance policies, about their will. She says you seemed obsessed with finding out how much money they had. That's not true. I never asked about any of that. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Had I asked something that could have been misinterpreted? Had I mentioned money in some innocent context that Rebecca had twisted into something sinister? She also says, Morrison continued, that 3 weeks ago, you asked her if she'd ever considered what would happen if she died suddenly, if Daniel and the kids would be taken care of. My mind raced back. 3 weeks ago, we'd been at Daniel's house for dinner, one of those awkward family gatherings where Rebecca barely spoke to me, and I spent most of the evening playing with my grandchildren in the other room. Had I said something like that? I'd been watching a crime documentary the night before, something about life insurance fraud. Had I made some casual comment that she'd taken the wrong way? I might have said something like that, I admitted slowly. But it wasn't a threat. It was just conversation, the kind of thing people say without thinking, the kind of thing someone says when they're planning to murder someone, Morrison said flatly. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything I said, everything I'd done, was being reinterpreted through this horrible lens where I was the villain, where every innocent action became evidence of murderous intent. I want a lawyer, I heard myself say. I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer. Morrison nodded, unsurprised. That's your right. We'll arrange for a public defender if you can't afford. I'll find my own lawyer, I said, even though I had no idea how I'd pay for one. Even though my savings account had maybe $3,000 and lawyers cost hundreds of dollars an hour. Even though everything in my life was falling apart and I was grasping at straws, trying to maintain some dignity, some control. They kept me there for another 2 hours, processing paperwork, taking my fingerprints, photographing me like I was already a convicted criminal. By the time they finally let me go with a stern warning not to leave Portland, it was almost 4 o'clock. The meeting with the waitress was long over. My one chance to get answers had slipped away while I was trapped in this bureaucratic nightmare. I called a taxi again, unable to face the bus ride home with people who might recognize me from the videos. As we drove through the late afternoon traffic, I stared at my phone, at the screenshots Morrison had shown me of those terrible text messages. Someone had sent them from my phone. Someone had access to my most personal device and had used it to build a case against me. When had they done it? Had they broken into my house before today? Had they taken my phone while I slept, while I was in the shower, while I was out in the garden? The violation made my skin crawl. Every moment of my life over the past few months suddenly felt contaminated, like I'd been living in a house full of hidden cameras. Every action recorded and catalogued and twisted. The taxi dropped me off in front of my house just as the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I could feel anything besides this crushing weight of despair. I paid the driver and walked up to my front door, fishing for my keys. That's when I saw it. Another note tucked into my mailbox. The same handwriting as before, rushed and urgent. You missed our meeting. They're watching you now. It's worse than you think. Your father didn't die of natural causes. Check the death certificate. The real one, not the copy they gave you. Safety deposit box, Bar 447, First National Bank downtown. The key is in Psalms. Box 447. Don't trust the family, any of them. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Powell's Books. Rare book room. Last chance. Come alone or die wondering the truth. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the note. My father didn't die of natural causes, but he'd had a heart attack. I'd been there. I'd watched him code, watched the doctors try to save him, watched them finally give up and call his time of death. It had been natural, tragic, but natural, unless it wasn't. I stumbled into my house and went straight to the dining room where I kept important papers in an old oak filing cabinet. My father's death certificate was in a folder labeled Dad Estate. I pulled it out with trembling hands and stared at it under the lamp. Cause of death: acute myocardial infarction, heart attack. Natural causes: signed by Dr. Richard Patterson at Providence Hospital, dated March 3rd, 2018. But as I stared at it, something felt wrong. The paper quality was different from other death certificates I'd seen. The signature looked slightly off, and in the bottom corner, almost too small to notice, there was a tiny notation: copy, original on file. Original on file. Where? And why would someone give me a copy instead of the original? I looked at the note again. Safety deposit box, the opposite 47. First National Bank, downtown. The key is in Psalms. I had to get to that attic. Had to find my father's Bible. Had to open that safety deposit box and find out what secret had been worth killing him for. Because if the waitress was right, if my father had been murdered, then whatever he'd hidden away was dangerous enough that people were willing to kill for it. And I was next on their list. The attic stairs creaked under my weight, each step groaning like they were protesting my intrusion. I hadn't been up here in years. Maybe not since Tom died and I'd stored away his clothes. Unable to look at them, but unable to throw them away either. The air was thick with dust, and the musty smell of old memories sealed away in cardboard boxes and plastic bins. I pulled the string hanging from the bare bulb, and weak yellow light flooded the cramped space. Boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled in my own handwriting from years past. Christmas 1995, Daniel's baby clothes, Tom's tools, Mom's china. A geography of my entire life, reduced to containers gathering dust in the dark. My father's things were in the far corner. I remembered that much. 3 boxes I'd packed up after his funeral, too grief-stricken to go through them properly, just throwing everything in and sealing them shut like I could seal away the pain of losing him. I'd told myself I'd sort through it all someday, but someday never came. And now, 7 years later, I was here in the middle of the night, desperately searching for a Bible that might contain the key to why someone wanted me dead. The first box was full of his clothes, shirts that still somehow carried the faint scent of his cologne mixed with pipe tobacco. The second held photographs, hundreds of them, spanning his entire life. My father as a young man in his Navy uniform during the Korean War. My father on his wedding day with my mother, both of them so young and full of hope. My father holding baby me, his face radiant with joy. I pushed the memories away. I couldn't afford to break down now, not when I was so close to answers. The third box was heavier. I pulled it toward me and opened the flaps, my heart pounding. Inside were books, dozens of them. My father had been an avid reader, everything from mystery novels to history books to philosophy. But there, right on top as if waiting for me, was his Bible. The leather cover was worn soft from decades of handling, the pages edged in gold that had faded to a dull brass color. With trembling hands, I lifted it out and opened it. The pages crackled, delicate as butterfly wings. I flipped to Psalms, not even sure what I was looking for. A key? A note? Some kind of clue? And then I found it. Tucked between Psalm 23 and Psalm 24, pressed flat against the page like a dried flower, was a small brass key. Attached to it with a piece of string was a yellow tag with numbers written in my father's distinctive handwriting. 447, FNB, for Eleanor only. I held that key in my palm, feeling its weight, feeling the weight of everything it represented. My father had hidden this, had told me about it on his deathbed, had warned me not to tell anyone. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, he'd wanted me to have it, and he'd wanted me to keep it secret. But from whom? From his own family? From my mother who died 2 years before him? From me until the very end? A sound from downstairs made me freeze. the distinct creak of my front door opening. Someone was in my house. Again. I quickly shoved the Bible and the key into my sweater pocket and turned off the attic light, plunging myself into darkness. My heart hammered so hard I was sure whoever was down there could hear it. Footsteps moved through my living room, slow and deliberate, like someone searching for something, or someone searching for me. I couldn't stay here. If they came up to the attic, I'd be trapped with no way out. But I couldn't go down the stairs either, not without being seen. My mind raced through options. The attic had one small window, the kind that looked out over the back porch roof. It was barely big enough for me to fit through, and I hadn't climbed anything in decades. But what choice did I have? Moving as quietly as I could, I made my way to the window and eased it open. The night air hit my face, cool and damp with the threat of rain. The porch roof was maybe 6 feet below the window, slanted and covered with moss that would be slippery as ice. If I fell, if I made noise, whoever was down there would know exactly where I was. The footsteps were on the stairs now, coming up to the second floor. No more time to think. I squeezed through the window, my hips barely fitting through the frame, and lowered myself down as carefully as I could. My feet touched the roof tiles, and immediately they started to slip. I grabbed the window frame, my fingers screaming with the effort of holding my full weight, and slowly, inch by terrifying inch, I made my way down to the edge of the roof. Above me, I heard the attic stairs creak. They were coming up. I had no choice. I sat down on the edge of the roof, took a deep breath, and dropped. It was only about 8 feet to the ground, but at my age it felt like jumping off a building. I landed hard, pain shooting through my ankles and knees, and barely managed to stifle a cry. For a moment I just lay there in my own garden, in the dirt between my rose bushes, trying to catch my breath and assess if anything was broken. Nothing felt broken, just badly bruised. I could see the light come on in the attic window above me. A silhouette appeared, looking around, searching. I pressed myself flat against the ground, praying the darkness would hide me, praying they wouldn't look out the window. After what felt like an eternity, the light went off. I heard footsteps moving through the house, opening doors, searching rooms. They were looking for something, the Bible, the key, or were they looking for me? I couldn't go back in the house. Not now. Maybe not ever. With my body aching and my hands still clutching the Bible and key in my pocket, I crawled through my garden, past the tomato plants I'd tended all summer, past the bird bath Tom had given me for our anniversary, past everything familiar and safe, until I reached the fence that separated my yard from the alley behind the houses. The fence was old, rotting in places. I found a loose board and pushed it aside, squeezing through into the alley. A homeless man sleeping in a doorway stirred but didn't wake. A cat yowled somewhere in the darkness. I stumbled forward, not even sure where I was going, just knowing I had to get away. My car was still in the driveway at the front of the house, useless to me now. My purse with my wallet and phone was still inside on the kitchen counter. I had nothing but the clothes on my back, a Bible, a key, and the growing certainty that everyone I trusted my entire life had been lying to me. I walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes, until I found myself standing outside St. Michael's Catholic Church on Division Street. The building was dark, except for a single light above the front entrance, a beacon in the night. The church was always open, Father Rodriguez had told me once, for anyone who needed sanctuary. I needed sanctuary now. Inside, the church was empty and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels holy. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the altar, where candles flickered in red glass holders. I collapsed into a back pew, my body finally giving out, and that's when I let myself cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears of grief, but ugly, gasping sobs that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. My father had hidden something important enough to kill for, and he'd kept it secret from everyone, even me, until the very last moment of his life. What could be so dangerous? What could be worth poisoning someone at their own birthday dinner? Worth framing an old woman for attempted murder? Worth breaking into her house in the middle of the night? I pulled out the key and stared at it in the candlelight. It looked so ordinary, just a small brass key. the kind that could open any number of things. But this key opened box 447 at First National Bank, and inside that box was whatever truth my father had died protecting. The church door opened behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. But it was just an elderly man in a threadbare coat, probably homeless, looking for a warm place to sleep. He nodded at me respectfully and took a seat several pews away, his head bowing in prayer or exhaustion. I couldn't tell which. I looked at my watch. 10:30 at night. In 7.5 hours, I was supposed to meet the mysterious waitress at Powell's Books. In 7.5 hours, I might finally learn the truth about what was happening to me, about who wanted me dead, about what my father had hidden away all these years. But first, I had to survive the night, in a church with nothing but a Bible, a key, and the terrible knowledge that someone in my own family, someone I'd loved and trusted, was trying to destroy me, and I had no idea who. I didn't sleep in that church pew. How could I? Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. The homeless man who'd come in eventually started snoring softly, a rhythmic sound that should have been comforting but only reminded me how alone I truly was. As the hours crawled by, I clutched my father's Bible to my chest like a shield, feeling the hard outline of the key pressing against my ribs through my sweater pocket. At 5:15 in the morning, as weak gray light began filtering through the stained glass windows, I finally stood up. My entire body ached from the fall off the roof, from sleeping sitting up, from the sheer weight of fear I'd been carrying for 2 days. I looked like a homeless person myself now, my clothes wrinkled and dirty, my hair a mess, my face streaked with dried tears and garden dirt. But I had the key, and I had an appointment. Powell's Books wouldn't open until 9, but the rare book room the waitress had mentioned was on the 3rd floor, and I knew from years of browsing there that serious collectors often arrived early, waiting outside for the doors to open. It was only a 15-minute walk from the church, through the slowly waking streets of Portland, past the food carts that were just beginning to set up, past the early morning joggers and the late-night drunks stumbling home. I arrived at 5:45, too early, too anxious to wait anywhere else. The famous Powell's sign, with its distinctive font and cream-colored background, loomed above me. "City of Books," it proclaimed, and I'd always loved this place. The way you could get lost in its maze of rooms and emerge hours later with your arms full of discoveries. But today, it looked different. Today, it looked like the scene of a final confrontation, a place where secrets would either be revealed or buried forever. A coffee shop across the street was just opening. I went in and ordered a black coffee with the few dollar bills I found crumpled in my pants pocket. Money I'd forgotten was there. The young barista with purple hair and multiple piercings gave me a concerned look, probably wondering if I was okay, if I needed help. I must have looked as desperate as I felt. I sat by the window, watching Powell's, watching the street, watching for anyone who might be watching me. At 6 o'clock exactly, I saw her, the waitress from the restaurant. She was standing outside Powell's main entrance, wearing jeans and a green jacket, her dark hair down instead of in the ponytail she'd worn that night. She looked younger than I remembered, fragile even, and she kept glancing around nervously like she expected someone to jump out at her. I left my coffee half finished and crossed the street. She saw me coming and her eyes widened with relief, or maybe fear. I couldn't tell which. "Mrs. Chen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I heard the police took you in for questioning." "They did," I said, "and someone broke into my house last night, twice. Who are you? And how do you know what's happening to me?" She looked around again, then grabbed my arm. "Not here. Too exposed. Follow me." She led me around the corner to a small parking lot, empty except for a few employee vehicles. We stood between 2 cars, hidden from the street view, and she finally turned to face me fully. Up close, I could see dark circles under her eyes, see that she'd been crying recently, see the terror that radiated from her like heat. "My name is Sophie," she said. "Sophie Martinez. And your father. He was my grandfather too." The world tilted. I grabbed the car next to me for support. "What?" "Your father. Richard Chen, had a relationship with my grandmother, Maria Martinez, back in the late 70s, before he met your mother, or maybe during, I'm not sure of the timeline. My mother was born in 1979, your father's daughter, your half-sister. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was saying. My father had another child? I had a half-sister I'd never known about? That's impossible, I whispered. My father would have told me. He would have. He couldn't, Sophie interrupted, because your mother's family had money, real money, old Portland timber money, and there was a prenuptial agreement that said if your father ever had an affair or a child outside the marriage, he'd get nothing. He'd be left with nothing. So he kept it secret. Paid my grandmother child support under the table for years. Cash payments. No paper trail. My mind was reeling. My mother's family had been wealthy, that was true. The Hendersons had owned lumber mills all over Oregon in the early 20th century. By the time I was born, most of the money was gone, spent or lost in bad investments. But there had been enough left for my mother to live comfortably. And when she died, I'd inherited a small trust fund that had helped Tom and me raise Daniel. But what does this have to do with someone trying to poison me? I asked, my voice shaking. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Because your father left everything to you in his will. The house, the pension, the life insurance. But what nobody knew, what he kept hidden in that safety deposit box, was the real inheritance. The one thing that survived from your mother's family. Land. 50 acres of undeveloped land in Clackamas County that's been sitting there for decades. And 3 years ago, a development company did geological surveys and found out that land is sitting on top of one of the richest deposits of rare earth minerals in the Pacific Northwest, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My legs gave out. I slid down the side of the car until I was sitting on the cold pavement, staring up at this girl who'd just blown my entire life apart. Hundreds of millions, I repeated stupidly. The development company has been trying to buy that land for 3 years. They've approached your family members, offering money for information about who owns it. And someone in your family figured out that you were the legal owner, even though you didn't know it. The deed is in that safety deposit box, along with your father's confession letter explaining everything. Explaining about my grandmother, about my mother, about why he kept it all secret. Who? I demanded. Who in my family knows about this? Sophie's face crumpled. I don't know. I swear I don't know. My mother died 2 years ago. Cancer. Before she died, she made me promise to watch over you to make sure you were safe. She said your father had told her that the inheritance was dangerous, that people would kill for it if they knew. So I got a job at Romano's when I heard your son had made a reservation there for your birthday. I was going to try to talk to you, to warn you. But then I saw someone slip something into your wine glass while everyone was distracted. I couldn't tell who it was. It was too crowded, too chaotic. All I knew was that your wine had been poisoned, and I had to warn you. I thought back to that night. The crowded restaurant, the long table with family members on both sides. Daniel, Rebecca, my nieces and nephews, my brother-in-law, his wife. Any of them could have done it. Any of them could have slipped poison into my glass while pretending to reach for bread, or adjust their napkin, or lean over to whisper to someone else. Why didn't you tell the police? I asked. Because I'm illegal, Sophie said, her voice breaking. My mother brought me here from Mexico when I was 5. I have DACA status, but if I get involved in a criminal investigation, if they dig into my background, I could be deported. I've lived here my whole life, Mrs. Chen. This is the only home I know. I wanted to help you, but I couldn't risk everything. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She was sobbing now, and I found myself reaching up from where I sat on the ground and taking her hand. This girl, this stranger, who was also somehow my family, had risked everything to save my life, had given me the clues I needed to uncover the truth, and she'd done it knowing it could destroy her own life in the process. It's okay, I heard myself say, even though nothing was okay. You saved my life, Sophie. You saved my life, and I'm grateful. But now what? She asked. Someone in your family tried to kill you for that land, and they're not going to stop just because it didn't work the first time. You need to get to that safety deposit box before they do. You need to get the deed and go to the police with everything." She was right. I knew she was right. But the thought of opening that box, of reading my father's confession letter, of learning the full truth about the lies that had shaped my entire existence, made me want to curl up and never move again. "The bank opens at 9, I said, checking my watch. It was 6:30. 2.5 hours to wait. 2.5 hours to hide and hope that whoever was hunting me didn't find me first. Sophie helped me to my feet. "You can't go home. You can't go anywhere they'd expect to find you." "I know," I said, "but I don't have my car. I don't have my wallet. I don't have anything." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of keys. "Take my car. It's the blue Honda over there. Drive somewhere public, somewhere with cameras and witnesses, a diner maybe. Stay there until the bank opens, then go straight there. Don't call anyone. Don't trust anyone." I took the keys, my hands still trembling. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." "Because you're family," she said simply, "and because my mother made me promise. She said your father was a good man who made mistakes, but he tried to protect the people he loved, even if he had to lie to do it. I think she wanted me to finish what he started." I sat in Sophie's blue Honda in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on 82nd Avenue, watching the early morning crowd filter in and out. Construction workers in dirty jeans and reflective vests. Nurses coming off the night shift, their scrubs wrinkled and their faces exhausted. A group of teenagers who'd clearly been out all night, laughing too loudly, still riding whatever high had carried them through the darkness. I looked like I belonged here, among the tired and desperate. I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror and barely recognized myself. My hair was matted on one side from lying on the church pew. There was a scratch on my cheek from the rose bushes I'd crawled through. My eyes were red and swollen with dark circles underneath that made me look 10 years older than I was. But I was alive. That had to count for something. At 7:30, I finally went inside the diner and ordered coffee and toast, paying with the last few dollars from my pocket. The waitress, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a name tag that said Denise, gave me a look that said she'd seen plenty of women in my condition before and knew better than to ask questions. I sat in a booth by the window where I could watch both the parking lot and the front door, and I tried to make sense of everything Sophie had told me. My father had another daughter, a whole other family he'd kept hidden for decades, and the secret he'd protected, the inheritance he'd hidden away, was hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. I couldn't even wrap my mind around that kind of money. Tom and I had struggled our whole lives. We'd clipped coupons and bought generic brands and put off home repairs because we couldn't afford them. We'd saved for years just to take Daniel to Disneyland once. And all that time, my father had known about land that would one day be worth a fortune, and he'd said nothing, but he'd left it to me. In his final moments, he'd made sure I knew where to find it. He'd protected it, protected me, even if it meant lying to everyone, even if it meant keeping secrets that would tear our family apart when they finally came to light, and someone in my family had found out. Someone had discovered the truth about the land, about the mineral deposits, about the hundreds of millions of dollars that should have been mine, and they'd decided I didn't deserve to live long enough to claim it. Coffee grew cold as I sat there, trying to figure out who it could be. I went through each family member in my mind, analyzing their motives, their opportunities, their characters. Daniel, my own son. He'd seemed genuinely devastated when Rebecca collapsed, but he was also deeply in debt. I knew that much. He and Rebecca lived in a beautiful house in the West Hills with a view of Mount Hood, drove expensive cars, sent my grandchildren to private schools. Where was that money coming from? Had he been counting on an inheritance? Had Rebecca pushed him towards something desperate? Rebecca herself? She'd always resented me, had always treated me like I was beneath her. Had she somehow found out about the land? Had she seen me as an obstacle to wealth she thought should belong to her family? My nephew Marcus, who'd called me at least twice a year asking for loans he never repaid. my niece, Margaret, who'd been so quick to post about the poisoning on Facebook, turning my tragedy into social media fodder. My brother-in-law, Gerald, who'd lost his construction business in 2008 and never quite recovered. Any of them could have done it. All of them had reasons to want money. And if they'd found out about the land, about what it was worth, any of them might have decided that an old woman's life was a small price to pay for generational wealth. At 8:45, I couldn't wait any longer. I left a $1 tip on the table, more than I could afford, but I felt guilty for taking up the booth for so long, and walked back out to Sophie's car. First National Bank was downtown, about a 20-minute drive in morning traffic. I had the key clutched so tightly in my hand that it left an impression in my palm. The drive felt like it took forever. Every red light was an eternity. Every car that pulled up next to me at a stoplight made my heart race, wondering if it was someone following me, someone waiting for the right moment to finish what they'd started at my birthday dinner. Downtown Portland was busy with morning commuters, people rushing to offices in the high-rises that lined the streets. I found parking in a garage 2 blocks from the bank and sat there for a moment, trying to gather my courage. Once I opened that safety deposit box, once I read whatever was inside, there would be no going back. My father's secrets would become my burden. The truth would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about my life, but I'd come too far to turn back now. The bank was one of those old buildings with marble floors and high ceilings, the kind that was built in the 1920s when banks were supposed to look like temples, inspiring trust and awe. I walked up to the desk where a young man in a suit sat behind a computer screen. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I said, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. "Box number 447. He typed something into his computer, then looked up at me with a professional smile. "I'll need to see identification and the key." My heart sank. "I don't have my identification. It's a long story, but I don't have my wallet." His smile faded. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but bank policy requires valid identification to access a safety deposit box for security purposes." "Please," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "Please, this is an emergency. That box belonged to my father, Richard Chen. He died 7 years ago. I'm Eleanor Chen, the legal heir. The key was left to me in his will." The young man looked uncomfortable. "I understand, ma'am, but without identification, there's nothing I can do. If you can come back with your driver's license or passport." "I can't come back." The words came out louder than I'd intended, and several other bank customers turned to look at us. I lowered my voice, trying to sound calmer. "Someone is trying to kill me. They tried to poison me 2 nights ago. They broke into my house. They're after what's in that box, and if I leave now, if I go home to get my ID, they might succeed. Please, I'm begging you." He stared at me like I was crazy, and maybe I was. Maybe I looked exactly like what I was, a desperate old woman with a wild story and no proof of anything. "Let me get my manager," he said finally, standing up and disappearing through a door behind him. I stood there waiting, aware of the other customers giving me wide berth, aware of the security guard by the door watching me carefully. Every second felt like an hour. What if they refused? What if I'd come all this way, survived everything, only to be stopped by bank policy and bureaucracy? The young man returned with an older woman in a gray suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had the look of someone who'd spent 40 years in banking and had seen every scam, every desperate plea, every attempt to break the rules. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "I'm Martha Reynolds, the branch manager. David here tells me you're trying to access a safety deposit box without identification." "Yes, please, I know how this sounds, but—" "I know who you are," she interrupted. "I saw you on the news. The poisoning at Romano's. Your face has been all over social media." My stomach dropped, of course. The videos, Margaret's Facebook post. I wasn't just some random old woman anymore. I was viral. I was infamous. "Then you know I'm telling the truth," I said. "Someone tried to kill me, and whatever is in that box, box 447, is the reason why." Martha Reynolds studied me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not quite sympathy, but understanding. recognition of another woman who'd been through something hard and survived. "Wait here," she said. She was gone for 10 minutes. 10 minutes during which I stood there in that marble lobby, feeling the weight of everyone's stares, feeling the fear creeping up my spine that at any moment someone would walk through those doors and finish what they'd started. When Martha returned, she had a file folder in her hands. "Your father's safety deposit box has been paid up through 2030, she said. "And according to our records, you are indeed listed as the sole beneficiary in the event of his death. Normally we require ID, but given the unusual circumstances and the fact that your picture is all over the internet so I can verify your identity, I'm going to make an exception. But I'm staying with you while you access the box. And if there's anything illegal in there, I'm obligated to report it." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much." She led me through a heavy door and down a flight of stairs to the vault. The safety deposit boxes lined the walls in rows, hundreds of them, each one holding someone's secrets. She found box 447 and used her master key along with mine to open it. "I'll give you privacy," she said, gesturing to a small room with a table and chair. "Take your time." The safe deposit box was smaller than I'd imagined, but inside it held everything that would destroy and rebuild my understanding of my entire life. I carried it to the small private room with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and when Martha Reynolds closed the door behind me, leaving me alone with my father's final secrets, I had to sit down before my legs gave out completely. Inside the box were 3 items: a manila envelope, thick with documents, a letter in my father's handwriting, my name written on the front in the careful script I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas notes, and a small velvet jewelry box, worn at the edges. I opened the letter first because I needed to hear his voice, needed some explanation before I looked at whatever evidence lay in those documents. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, and just seeing those words in his handwriting made tears spring to my eyes. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the key I left for you. I'm so sorry, my darling girl. Sorry for the secrets. Sorry for the lies. Sorry for the burden I'm about to place on your shoulders. But you deserve the truth, even if it comes too late for me to explain it to your face." The letter went on for 6 pages, and with each paragraph, my world shifted further off its axis. He told me about Maria Martinez, about falling in love with her before he met my mother, about the baby they'd conceived. He told me about my mother's family discovering the affair, about the ultimatum they'd given him: abandon Maria and the child, sign the prenuptial agreement, marry into the Henderson fortune, or lose everything and be left penniless. "I made the wrong choice," he wrote. "I chose money over love. I chose security over honesty, and I've lived with that shame every day since. I sent Maria money, as much as I could, without your mother noticing, but it was never enough. It could never make up for not being there, for not claiming my daughter, for forcing her to grow up without a father." He explained about the land, the 50 acres in Clackamas County that had been my grandmother Henderson's. When she died, it should have been divided among her children, but there had been a dispute, a legal battle that lasted years. By the time it was settled, the land had been awarded solely to my mother, and when my mother died, it passed to my father, and he'd immediately put it in a trust with me as the sole beneficiary. "I knew someday that land would be valuable," he wrote. "I didn't know about the minerals when I set up the trust, but I knew Portland was growing, knew that undeveloped land that close to the city wouldn't stay undeveloped forever. I wanted you to have it, Eleanor. You, my legitimate daughter, the one I raised and loved and watched grow into a woman I'm so proud of. But I also wanted to make sure Maria's daughter, your half-sister Sarah, was taken care of. So I set aside money for her in a separate account, made sure she'd get a college education, made sure she'd never want for anything." But then he wrote something that made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, someone came to see me at the hospital. I was already sick by then, the cancer eating away at me, but my mind was still sharp. It was your brother-in-law, Gerald. He'd somehow found out about the land, about the trust, about the mineral surveys that had been done. He offered me money to change the trust, to name him as co-beneficiary, When I refused, he threatened to tell you everything, to destroy your memory of me, to expose all my lies and secrets. I still refused. My father's handwriting became shaky here, like he'd been writing through pain or emotion. 2 days later, I had what the doctor said was a heart attack. But Eleanor, I'm not sure it was natural. I think Gerald may have... I can't prove it. I'll never be able to prove it. But the nurse who was on duty that night quit suddenly the next day, and I heard she moved to California. I think Gerald paid her to inject something into my IV. I think my heart attack was murder. The letter fell from my hands. Gerald. My brother-in-law Gerald, married to Tom's sister Linda. Gerald, who'd been at my birthday dinner. Gerald, who'd been at the table when my wine was poisoned. I picked up the letter again with trembling hands. I'm writing this on what I suspect will be my last night alive. The doctors say I'm stable, but I can feel my body shutting down. If I'm right, if Gerald did this, then he won't stop with me. Once he knows you have the land, once the trust transfers to you, he'll come after you too. That's why I'm hiding this letter, hiding the deed, hiding everything where only you can find it. The key is in my Bible in Psalms, because I know you remember that Psalm 23 was always my favorite. You used to recite it with me when you were a little girl. The letter ended with words that broke my heart completely. I failed Maria. I failed Sarah. I failed to be the man I should have been. But I won't fail you, Eleanor. This land, this inheritance, it's my final gift to you. Use it well. Use it to do the good I couldn't do. And please, if you can find it in your heart, find your half-sister. Find Sophie, Sarah's daughter, your niece. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her grandmother. Tell her that some mistakes can never be fixed, but maybe they can be forgiven. I love you, my darling girl. I'm so, so sorry, Dad. I sat there crying, clutching the letter to my chest, mourning not just my father, but the man he'd wanted to be, the man he'd tried to become too late. Sophie had said her mother Sarah died 2 years ago. She'd never gotten to hear these words, never gotten the apology she deserved. With shaking hands, I opened the manila envelope. Inside was the deed to the 50 acres, registered in my name through the trust. There were geological survey reports documenting the rare earth mineral deposits, estimates of their value running into the hundreds of millions. There were bank statements showing the payments my father had made to Maria over the years, proof of his secret family. And there was one more document that made everything clear. It was a copy of my father's medical records from the night he died, and paperclipped to it was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Injection site on left arm. Potassium chloride. Causes cardiac arrest. Looks natural. No autopsy ordered. Perfect crime. The note was dated the day after my father died. Gerald had killed my father, and then, when he realized I was the sole heir to the land, he'd tried to kill me too. He'd poisoned my wine at my birthday dinner, probably planning to make it look like I tried to kill Rebecca and taken the poison myself by mistake. When that failed, when I'd switched the glasses, he'd improvised, let everyone believe I was the murderer, knowing that if I was in prison or dead, he could contest the trust, could claim the land through some legal loophole. I opened the small velvet jewelry box last. Inside was a simple gold locket on a chain. I opened it and saw 2 tiny photographs, so small I had to squint to see them clearly. On one side was a picture of me as a baby. On the other side was a picture of another baby who looked remarkably similar. Sarah, my half-sister. He'd carried us both with him close to his heart. All these years. I don't know how long I sat in that small room crying, grieving, rage building inside me like a storm. But eventually, I gathered up all the documents, put them back in the envelope, and went to find Martha Reynolds. I need to call the police, I told her. I need Detective Morrison. And I need you to make copies of everything in this box, multiple copies, because I'm about to expose a murderer, and I need to make sure this evidence can't disappear. The next hours were a blur. Detective Morrison arrived with 2 other officers. I showed him everything. The letter, the medical records, the note about the potassium chloride, the deed, everything. I told him about Sophie, about my father's secret family, about Gerald finding out and killing my father for the land. "We'll need to exhume your father's body," Morrison said. "Test for potassium chloride. It's detectable even after years if we know what to look for." "Do it," I said. "Do whatever you need to do." They arrested Gerald that afternoon, found him at his house packing a suitcase, about to run. They found the nurse who'd quit, tracked her down in Sacramento, and she confessed everything. Gerald had paid her $50,000 to inject my father with potassium chloride. She'd kept the syringe, hidden it in her apartment insurance, in case Gerald ever tried to betray her. Rebecca recovered fully, and when she found out it was Gerald, not me, who'd poisoned the wine, she broke down. She'd suspected me because Gerald had been whispering in her ear for months, telling her I was dangerous, telling her I was unstable, planting seeds of doubt. He'd even sent those text messages from my phone, having stolen it during a family dinner weeks earlier and cloned it. My son Daniel came to see me at my house 3 days after Gerald's arrest. He stood in my living room, the same room where he'd played with toy trucks as a child, where he'd brought Rebecca to meet me for the first time, where we'd celebrated so many Christmases and birthdays and ordinary moments that now felt precious beyond measure. "Mom," he said, and then he just broke down sobbing. "I'm so sorry. I believed him. I believed you tried to hurt Rebecca. I'm so sorry." I wanted to forgive him, wanted to open my arms and tell him it was okay, that everything would be fine now, but the wound was too deep. He'd believed I was capable of murder. My own son had looked at me and seen a killer instead of his mother. "I know you're sorry," I said quietly, "but Daniel, you chose to believe the worst of me without even asking for my side of the story. You let them take me away in police custody. You didn't visit me. You didn't call. You just abandoned me when I needed you most." "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. But some betrayals can't be fixed with apologies. Some wounds don't heal. They just scar over, permanent reminders of how much pain one person can inflict on another." I sold the land 6 months later. A development company paid $320 million for it. I gave half to Sophie, my father's granddaughter, my niece. She cried when I told her, said it was too much, but I insisted. It was what my father would have wanted, what he should have done when he was alive. I donated $50 million to organizations helping undocumented immigrants, in memory of Maria Martinez, the woman my father loved and abandoned. I set up college funds for my grandchildren. I paid off Daniel and Rebecca's debts, not because I forgave them, but because I wanted them to have no excuse, no reason to blame their problems on anyone else. And then I moved away from Portland, bought a small house in Astoria by the ocean, where nobody knows my story, where I can walk on the beach and listen to the waves and try to make peace with everything I've learned. I see Daniel once a month, supervised visits with my grandchildren. We're polite to each other, careful, like strangers navigating a minefield. Maybe someday I'll be able to forgive him fully. Maybe someday the love I feel for my son will outweigh the betrayal. But that day hasn't come yet. I see Sophie more often. She's become the daughter I never had, the family I didn't know I needed. She calls me Aunt Eleanor now, and sometimes when she laughs, I see my father in her face, see the ghost of the man he might have been if he'd been braver, if he'd chosen love over security all those years ago. Gerald is serving life in prison for 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He'll die there, and I feel nothing about that. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow emptiness where my ability to trust used to be. Some truths are too devastating to overcome. Some betrayals too deep to forgive. I learned that the hard way at 68 years old, at a birthday dinner that was supposed to be a celebration, but became instead a revelation of everything ugly and broken in the people I'd loved most. I'm wealthy now beyond imagination, but I'd give it all back for one more day with my father where he told me the truth. One more chance to tell him I understood, that I forgave him, that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. But time doesn't work that way, and neither does forgiveness. Some mistakes echo through generations. Some secrets poison everything they touch. And some families are destroyed not by hate, but by the lies we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of. That waitress saved my life that night at Romano's, but the truth she set in motion destroyed everything else, and I'm still not sure which loss is greater, the life I almost lost or the family I can never get back. The end. So tell me, what would you have done if you discovered that the person who tried to poison you, who murdered your father, who destroyed your entire sense of safety, was someone from your own family? Could you forgive them? Could you sit across from your son at Christmas dinner, knowing he abandoned you when you needed him most? Could you look at your grandchildren and not see the reflection of betrayal in their innocent faces? Eleanor chose a path that many of us couldn't. She chose honesty over comfort, truth over the illusion of family harmony. She walked away from the people who should have protected her, and in doing so, she found a family she never knew existed. Sometimes the blood we're born with poisons us, and the family we choose becomes our salvation. This story isn't just about murder or money or secrets buried in safety deposit boxes. It's about the devastating moment when you realize that the people you loved most are capable of seeing you as disposable. It's about how quickly love can turn to suspicion, how easily trust can shatter, and how some betrayals carve wounds so deep that even time can't heal them. Eleanor survived the poison in her glass, but the poison of doubt, of accusation, of being abandoned by her own son, that poison still runs through her veins. And I think that's the real tragedy of this story. Not what was taken from her, but what she can never get back. What about you? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you ever had to choose between forgiveness and self-preservation? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think twice about the secrets your own family might be hiding, do me a favor, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and follow this channel for more stories that will make you feel everything. Because life isn't about the fairy tales we're told. It's about the hard truths we survive. And Eleanor's truth might just save you from your own.